Welcome back, students. This is Module 6.1.5. This is Tetrapoda class Reptilia. So we're looking at the reptiles. This is the second class under superclass Tetrapoda. And class Reptilia, the etymology of that name means to creep. So these are some of the little creepy crawlers. And here you can see some of the organisms that are included: lizards, snakes, turtles, crocodilians, and something called tuatara. So we'll teach you what they are. You should know that herpetology is the study of amphibians and reptiles together. Although they're different lineages, they're both small, modest groups of tetrapods, and so we group them together. Herp means to creep as well, so herpetology is the study of the creepers. And these animals have become fully terrestrial. They're independent from water. They have several adaptations. One of them is that they have scales that make the skin much more resistant to drying than the smooth, moist skin of the amphibians. The scales are made of the protein keratin, and reptile scales are ectodermal, and they're in a continuous sheet. You cannot remove one individual scale from a reptile as you can with a fish. Remember, fish scales are mesodermal. These animals have the land egg, and we'll learn about it a little bit later. They typically have an egg tooth to help them break out of the egg. It's very tiny, however. These animals have a cloaca, and their excretory waste product is uric acid, the white crystalline material that's non-toxic but kind of expensive to make. They have a three-chambered heart, all the reptiles except for one group, and that is the crocodilians. The crocodilians have realized the full potential of a double loop circulatory pattern, and they have two atria and two ventricles and complete separation of blood with high and low levels of oxygen. Reptiles have the Jacobson's organ. This is the chemosensory organ in the roof of their mouth. It's well developed, and this leads to the practice in some lineages of reptiles of tongue flicking. There are particular families and groups in which tongue flicking is very common, a way that the reptiles sample their environment. It also allows reptiles, they can track prey. Some venomous snakes will strike their prey, immediately release, and then they will use the Jacobson's organ to follow the scent of their prey to where it dies. It succumbs to the venom, and then they're able to eat it. Reptiles are ectothermal. Again, some people will call them cold-blooded, but a lizard who's in a desert that's 100 degrees and whose body temperature is 105 degrees is hardly cold-blooded. But they do derive the energy for elevating their body temperature from the environment. And reptiles can show extensive behavioral thermoregulation, where they can regulate their body temperature within a narrow preferred range. So a preferred body temperature is something that reptiles can manage quite readily just through their behavior. They also have physiological adaptations that help them in that regard. Reptiles have better leg placement for terrestrial life. I'm going to make two little drawings here. Maybe I'll make them. There, let's see. There's a pin. And so this is a cross-section through an amphibian that I'm going to draw. So that's its body, and its legs will just be splayed out to the side like that. So that would be an amphibian. So make such a drawing. Now, a reptile has its legs somewhat underneath its body, so they're better positioned for life on land. And so that's what we mean by improved leg placement for terrestrial life. And within class Reptilia, there are 5 lineages or 5 groups. We're just going to call them groups. But before we get to looking at the various groups within this class, we're going to look at the land egg. And you should know the major functions of the different membranes within the land egg. Let me see. I need a... Well, I guess we can just use this particular drawing right here. And notice from the outside in, On the very outside of the egg is the shell. The next layer that goes all the way around just under the shell is called the chorion. And this serves to organize and also for exchange. And if you've ever eaten a boiled egg, the chorion is the membrane just under the shell when you peel the egg. There's often an air space at the end of an egg. Air, that's an R, air space. And the thing to recognize, I guess, is the little embryo that's in the center of the egg. And so attached to kind of the umbilical region, the belly button region, is the yolk sac. So the yolk sac and the chorion are examples of extra embryonic membranes. Extra means outside. So these are membranes outside the embryo. And there are two more that you must know. The membrane that surrounds the embryo and protects it is called the amnion. Oh, the yolk sac, by the way, provides food. The amnion is this little green one right here, and it surrounds the embryo, and it provides protection. Sometimes we will call it a fluid cradle. It provides, within the amnion, there's amniotic fluid, which you may have heard of. And then another sac that's kind of attached to the belly region of the embryo is the allantois. And the allantois collects waste. Now, I want you to consider for a moment what would happen if the waste inside the allantois were toxic, if there were poison in there. I mean, it's so close to the embryo, it could affect it. It could kill the embryo. And so it's critical. It's one of the constraints of the land egg. There are two constraints. And the second constraint that I've listed here is that the land egg requires non-toxic waste product. In this case, it's uric acid inside the allantois. The first constraint is that the land egg requires internal fertilization. Think about that for a moment. Why is that true? Well, the land egg is what made sex, as you know it, necessary. Copulation has to occur so that the sperm can fuse with the egg before the shell goes on it. And so that's why sex in the vertebrates is copulation, the way that sex occurs in mammals, for example. And so these are two constraints of the land egg, or requirements of the land egg, constraints. All right, let's go on. Now, this is just kind of reviewing what we've already talked about. These are functions of parts of the amniotic egg. There are 4 extra embryonic membranes: the amnion, the allantois, the yolk sac, and the chorion. You should know these basic functions. One thing that I didn't talk about specifically was albumin. Albumin is the egg white, and this is a nutritious protein. And so this is food as well. And it's found inside the chorion. And so there you go. Reptile scales are a continuous sheet. If you look here, it's folded, and parts are hardened and parts are flexible. And so you can't remove one individual scale. Like if we went in here and tried to remove one of these scales from this snake skin, it wouldn't happen without tearing it. Now, there are differences in reptile scales. Snake scales don't grow individually. Instead, snakes shed their skin. Alligators and turtles, they have ever-growing scales. Sometimes we call them scutes, but not necessarily. Some people call scutes the scales on this belly of a snake. So it really depends. But the fact is that alligators and turtles don't shed their skins like snakes and lizards do. So let's look at the first of 5 groups of reptiles. These are the lizards. The lizards are the typical reptile. They have 4 legs, a tail, and a neck, ear openings, and eyelids. They do shed their skin to grow. The majority of lizards are predaceous. There are some few herbivores. One big one that most people are familiar with is the iguana. the iguana is herbivore. If we look at the 4 lizards on this particular slide, all right, here in the upper right, this is a head of a desert grassland whiptail lizard. It's one of the most common lizards in Cochise County. It has a distinction. This is an all-female species, and they reproduce asexually in a clonal manner. It's kind of an interesting thing. In the upper left, of course, is one of 2 venomous lizards in the world. That's the Gila monster, which we have in abundance here in Cochise County. But it is a rare reptile in that it has very limited distributions, mostly found here in the southwest United States and northwest Mexico. The beaded lizard, which is a second venomous lizard, looks something like that, a little larger and a little differently colored. Here is just a typical fence lizard. This is a real typical lizard. And here in the lower right, we have the largest lizard in the world, the Komodo dragon, which belongs to the monitor lizard family. And here you can see it tongue flicking, and of course it has a forked tongue. These animals lie in wait and run out by a game trail, and they run out and bite an animal like a goat. And they have such virulent bacteria in their mouth that the goat will get an infection and die, and then the lizards will track the smell of decaying flesh using their Jacobson's organ and tongue flicking, and they'll check it out. Of course, right now, scientists are investigating why monitor lizards don't get infections from the bacteria that are in their mouth, and they're looking for antibiotics or something to control bacteria for humans. So people are always trying to figure out how to use things in the natural world. Very closely related to lizards and derived from them are snakes. Snakes originally lost their legs to burrow. They are, of course, legless. They don't have any ear openings. They don't have movable eyelids. Instead, they have a transparent scale that goes over their eye called the spectacle, which is their eyelid. And although they originally lost those legs to burrow, they came back up on the surface and they found they could do quite nicely without legs. And they're now arboreal species that live in trees, aquatic species that live in water, and many terrestrial species that live on land, as well as many burrowing species still. And so snakes are in many, many different habitats. Snakes are all predators. There are no snakes at the salad bar. And snakes have evolved various ways of killing their prey. Some, like this is a smooth green snake here in the upper right. I don't think it really occurs in Arizona, or if it does, barely on some of the boundaries up north. But it will simply grab its prey and swallow it. Now, its prey consists of like little insects like crickets. They're not going to do that much harm, but if you grab like a rodent and try to do that, that rodent might bite you and could bite your eye out and could severely hamper your fitness. And so evolution has equipped these animals with different ways to kill their prey. One way is by constriction. Constrictors, here is a reticulated python taking down an antelope, and in constriction the snake will simply wrap around the animal, and each time it exhales it tightens, and pretty soon the animal can't inhale and they suffocate. Now, it's not only big pythons and boa constrictors that use constriction to kill. We have several local constrictors. For example, one of the most common snakes here in Cochise County is the gopher snake. Some people call it the bull snake, but it is a constrictor. As are king snakes. We have several species, 2 species of king snakes right here in Cochise County. Here in the upper left is one of those king snakes. This is a Sonoran mountain king snake, and it mimics the venomous coral snake, but the Sonoran mountain king snake shown here is not venomous. Remember, red and black, my friend Jack. The red and yellow kill a fellow. So we don't see the red and yellow or the red and white together. So this is a harmless king snake. Of course, a second way that snakes have evolved to subdue prey is venom. Venom is modified saliva glands. Now, your saliva has some enzymatic properties. With venom, the enzymatic properties have just become greatly enhanced through evolution. And there are some snakes that are a little bit venomous. We call these rear fang snakes. But the really dangerously venomous snakes are those that have fully evolved venom. And we have the rattlesnakes, as we see here, a black-tailed rattlesnake, and They are considered among the most evolved and sophisticated, considered the most advanced of snakes. Their fangs actually fold, and they have hollow fangs that deliver the venom. They have very large venom glands. That's what makes their head look so wide. They have venom glands out in their cheeks. Here in the lower right, we see the warning hood of a cobra, which is an elapid. That's one family of snakes. You don't need to know that. But it has neurotoxic venom. Rattlesnakes have mostly hemotoxic, although there are some that also have neurotoxic. This is just speaking to different actions of venoms. The venom, hemotoxic, will digest tissue, and hemo means blood, so it's toxic to the blood. Neurotoxic paralyzes the nervous system, and the majority of the most dangerously venomous snakes are neurotoxic, and these are the ones that can kill you in just a few minutes. I think of the fierce snake of Australia and some of the others out there. In any case, so right here we see a bunch of, this is a hibernaculum of garter snakes up in northern latitudes, maybe in Canada even. And they aggregate in huge numbers, and after they hibernate, they come out, and this is, I shouldn't have said a hibernaculum, that's where they overwinter, but this is after they come out of the hibernaculum, they are involved in mating behavior, and so they have mass mating sites. So snakes are really fascinating, and one thing you really need to know is that snakes shouldn't be killed on sight. They're an important part of the natural ecosystem. They're predators, so they're fairly uncommon. And to kill a snake on sight makes no sense. What makes far more sense, about 1 in 6 of you will be seriously injured by an automobile accident. So if you want to kill things that are threatening to you, you should take a sledgehammer, and every time you see a car, you should go smash it. That makes far more sense than to kill every snake you see. That's just ridiculous. I mean, like 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 will be bit by a snake, and most of you won't have any problem. Let me give you some advice, though. Should you ever have that very rare occurrence where you are bit by a venomous snake, before you allow the doctor to give you anti-venom, especially for a rattlesnake bite, because most healthy adult humans will survive a rattlesnake bite, no problem. But the anti-venom can actually cause an allergic reaction that can kill you. And so they need to do an immune reaction test, to see if you're allergic to the anti-venom, because that kills many people. The way they get anti-venom is they inject venom into another animal. In the past, they used horses. More recently, I think they're using sheep. And so then a little bit of that, and then the immune system of these animals creates antibodies, and antibodies to the venom is what is in the anti-venom that they'll inject into you. Now, the problem is if you have a severe immune response to the sheep or horse proteins, you could die from that. Forget the snake bite. And so it's critically important that you are tested before they use it. A third group of reptiles. Now, the first two, the snakes and lizards, are closely related. The turtles are one of the distinct lineages and one of the oldest lineages of reptiles. They go back a long ways. They have a shell with growing scutes or growing scales, so they don't shed their skin. They have a beak that has no teeth, and they really do have this very interesting appearance. The dorsal part is called the carapace of the shell. They're really unusual because their shoulder joint is inside their ribs. The ribs make up the bony inside of the shell, and so their shoulders are initially in a normal position for vertebrates, and then as they slowly grow within the egg, their shoulders go back inside their ribs, and it's really unusual. The ventral part of their shell is called the plastron, and in males that will be kind of concave or go in a little bit, so that if the two turtles have sex, the male won't slide off. The male turtle actually has a extension of his cloaca that's very penis-like, and so that's how they have sex. Now, one of the questions I sometimes get is, what's the difference between a tortoise and a turtle? Now, once again, both tortoises and turtles are turtles. So all tortoises and turtles are turtles, but not all turtles are tortoises. Tortoises are distinctive in that they have a domed carapace and they have columnar legs, and they're adapted for a drier climate. They don't live in water. So this is a tortoise right here. This is a typical turtle. Notice that its shell is a little bit flatter, and its legs are flat and paddle-like, and that's a more aquatic animal. Of course, we have sea turtles as well. And what's interesting about sea turtles is they have evolved the land egg, but secondarily, they have recolonized the water. And now they would be better off without the land egg, but they have to come back on land, and they lay eggs. So it's really not, it just shows you that evolution doesn't give creatures everything that they would want right away. It's hard to reverse that mode of reproduction. And then here in the upper right, we show some kind of, I'm not sure what species of turtle this is. This is an eastern species, but it's laying eggs out of its cloaca. Kind of an interesting photograph. A fourth lineage of reptiles are the crocodilians. This includes all sorts of alligators, crocodiles, and then the upper right here is a gharial. This is a kind of an odd fish-eating crocodilian from India. These animals also have ever-growing scutes, so they don't shed their skin. Very noteworthy in this lineage is that they have a four-chambered heart. And of all the living reptiles, this is a group that's most closely related to both birds and dinosaurs. So in an evolutionary sense, these are closer to both the birds and the dinosaurs. They're a really fascinating group of animals. Excuse me. The final lineage, the fifth and final lineage of reptiles are the tuataras. Now, upon looking on one, you might think that looks like a lizard, but here the tuatara in the upper right has the answer, I am not a lizard. These are primitive lizard-like reptiles. They are only found down in the vicinity of New Zealand. And they live in burrows, and they feed on seabirds, which is what you see in the upper left. And they feed on big crickets called wettas. Weta is the name of Peter Jackson's production company. Peter Jackson is who did the Lord of the Rings. He's a New Zealander, and he grew up looking at these big, fierce crickets that are called wettas, and it kind of inspired him to go into movies. He at first was into special effects and did horror movies and monsters. Think of what he did with King Kong. And anyway, so that's one of the major foods of these animals. The tuataras are the only survivors of a large group of reptiles, a lineage, that roamed the earth at the same time as the dinosaurs. And it really hasn't changed much in over 225 million years of time. We have old fossils from that period. And for this reason, because they haven't changed much, sometimes we call such lineages, we'll call them living fossils. Sometimes sharks or turtles or scorpions are considered in this group because they have very ancient fossils as well. The tuataras, however, are endangered, and what they're endangered by is the introduction of non-native species. Think of rats that eat their eggs, and think of cats which hunt them and kill them. Now, these aren't lizards. They have no ear openings, and they don't have a penis, no hemipenes like snakes and lizards have. These animals mate vent to vent, and so those are the tuataras, if you will. Now, reptiles are very important. They gave rise to the remaining two classes of vertebrates. One lineage of reptiles gave rise to the birds, and of course some say that birds are reptiles, and in a biological or phylogenetic sense, you can make that argument very strongly. And another lineage of reptiles gave rise to the mammals. So down here on the right, we can see this is a dinosaur on the top, this is Archaeopteryx here, and this is a chicken down here, looking at the three skeletons. So a little dinosaur, an Archaeopteryx, and a chicken skeleton. Here on the left, we can see this is one of the mammal-like reptiles, and down below we see a dog skeleton, a true mammal. And of course, we could study a lot more about dinosaurs and whatnot, but we're not going to. But you should know that the dinosaurs did rule the earth for a while, but about 65 million years ago, there was a catastrophic event that caused the dinosaurs to rather suddenly, in geological terms, become extinct. And one of the hypotheses is that there was a meteorite impact, And so when a meteorite hit the Earth, it created a big cloud of dust that changed the climate and led to all sorts of changes that ultimately led to the demise of the dinosaurs. And there is evidence for that. If we look at the strata of the Earth's crust all over the Earth that goes back to 65 million years ago, we can find a layer that has iridium in it, which is a very rare element on the Earth, but it sometimes occurs in meteorites. And so it looks like a meteorite may have pulverized itself and then created this cloud of iridium dust that settled 65 million years ago. Anyway, that's the hypothesis. Of course, the real reason that dinosaurs became extinct was clarified for us by Gary Larson, and it was because they were smoking. So students pay close attention to that. And with this, we will conclude the module on reptiles, and we'll come back and talk about the very close cousins of the reptiles, the birds, class Aves.